Hello and welcome to the Trust and Influence in B2B podcast. I'm your host, Joel Harrison, and this podcast is about everything related to the challenges of trust associated with B2B right now, particularly with a focus on thought leadership. I'm delighted to be joined today by my guest, who's Hayley Brooksbank. Hayley is a marketer who has a fascinating and unique challenge around thought leadership in her role as Group Marketing Director at tech and product development consultancy TTP, who in themselves are a fascinating organization. They're right at the intersection of product and service activities. So really interesting and unique challenge around thought leadership that relates to that. Prior to joining TTP, Hayley's career spanned some of the biggest names in professional services, and she's actually began her career in agency land, which is quite unusual to go from professional services to agencies, or rather the other way around. So suffice to say, she's done the full spectrum of B2B marketing, and I'm looking forward to talking to her about understanding the obstacles of building a thought leadership program in what must be one of the companies in the world with the highest proportion of PhDs per employee. So Hayley, welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's delightful to be on your new podcast about thought leadership. Fantastic. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Well, really excited. You put your hand up to Beast to do it, so you put yourself through this. So let's have a great
Yes,
conversation.
yes, exactly. Volunteered, but hopefully, I think it's an interesting topic. I think so. I'm hoping we're going to have a good discussion.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's really great to talk to you and to in a conversation before the podcast to understand a bit more about your dynamics of what you're doing. So, to that end, let's start by talking a bit about TTP and just your unique position in the market. What kind of problems do you solve for your clients, and how does that create specific challenges for marketing?
Well, TTP is a bit of a rare beast, really. We work with big corporates and startups on highly technical challenges that sit outside of their usual remit, or if they go beyond their own resources. So clients come to us, we always say, with their toughest problems. It means that one team might be helping a French space tech company to build a direct-to-mobile satellite network, which is hopefully going to offer a real alternative to Starlink's dominance, which is a pretty hot topic right now. And then another team might be working with a Japanese biotech to make advanced cell therapies for cancer and Parkinson's more accessible and affordable, which is also a pretty hot topic right now. So it's really cutting edge, and it's scientists and engineers doing great stuff for clients. When it comes to marketing that offer, one of the biggest challenges we face is actually a lot of our work is highly confidential. So, for example, in medtech, because it's so highly regulated, even if we can talk about it, it might take years for a breakthrough that we've made to actually be in a market-ready device. And in any sector, if we're working with startups, which we do, we work with highly funded startups, they may get bought once their sort of idea looks viable, and then the buyer might not want us to talk about our contribution to the R&D. So that is a real challenge, sort of weaving through what can and can't be said. It's very sort of confidential, as I say.
They're doing amazing things. You just might not be able to talk about them quite well you might want to.
Yeah, when we can, it's great, but sometimes we're not allowed to for ages.
Okay, it sounds really exciting as a firm, though, in terms of the challenges you're facing you outline there. So it's a really inspirational to be part of.
Yeah, it's really fascinating.
So we mentioned earlier on, you have loads of PhDs at the organization, loads of technical experts to go along that. They might not actually have a doctorate or anything like that, but they're just very, very technical people. What unique challenges do you face when trying to develop thought leadership that balances that technical depth, but also is accessible?
I think what's probably familiar to any of us working in professional services is the very high level of technical expertise and intelligence that our consultants have. Perhaps it's a bit more extreme here because they're scientists and engineers. They can be very precise and they can be very data driven. But hey, who doesn't deal with that in a law firm or an accountancy? So I'd say it's probably more of an exaggerated challenge here than a completely unique one. It is about trust. Our job is to get them to trust that we as comms professionals can help shape their thinking into something more engaging and more focused. They can sometimes miss the so what that helps to shape a compelling narrative. So I think it's our job to bridge the gap to preserve the depth, which is really important to both our clients and our consultants, while making sure there's a clear point to the story and something that resonates beyond the lab, sort of, if you like, moving it from scientific thesis to accessible professional insight.
And that I can appreciate the nature of that challenge. That must be fascinating because they are so in the detail of what they're doing, but and they're so knowledgeable about it, they don't understand how to position it for a wider context.
Well, they struggle to leave stuff out because for them, every single part of the story matters because it's science and engineering. You take one pillar away and it doesn't work anymore. So what we have to get them to is something about talking about an issue that is clear and perhaps more focused than they would initially feel comfortable with. They want everything to be in the story, on the slide, everything to be there.
Okay. One of the phrases you used when we were speaking beforehand was the phrase nose wrinkle, which I loved.
Yeah.
And this is the reaction you said many of the consultants had when you used the expression thought leadership around them. So tell us a bit about that. What is it? Why do you think it happens? And why is it particularly pronounced for these kind of highly technical or professional services individuals?
Yeah, I don't think it's unique to TTP. It's definitely, I've had the nose wrinkle for probably about a decade. So yes, you're in a positioning or strategy session with an in-house expert. You mention thought leadership and they visibly shudder. And to be fair, I think, probably marketing has to take some responsibility for that because we've massively overused the term. And a lot of what gets labeled as thought leadership is actually probably just well-packaged opinion. It's not that it has no value, but it's just not what the term originally meant. I think true thought leadership is rare. When I was looking back after preparing for this podcast and just thinking about it, I think my first experience of it was when I joined Hay Group, which is a management consultancy, and it was back in 2006. Then McKinsey had just sort of published The War for Talent. And in the early 2000s, it genuinely reframed how businesses thought about their people, and they saw talent as a key differentiator for the first time. It was the holy grail of business thinking. Everybody wanted their own war for. But over time, I think it turned into more of a content marketing formula. Do some C-suite research, publish a white paper, PR the hell out of it, and whether or not it was actually groundbreaking. Today, I think that means we've often ended up with something that, we sort of talk about in the team as thought fellowship, sort of expert commentary, dressed up as insight with topical business issues put through what I call the opinion mill. So it's commenting on something rather than developing it like the War for Talent did. And the problem with technical experts is they know the difference. And so they associate the term thought leadership with spin and not substance. And I don't blame them. If we want them to take part in content development, we need to restore the distinction and be honest about what kind of content we're actually creating.
I think that's fascinating, beautifully expressed as well. I think that it's great to have another. I was talking to Vito from Capgemini about the Kathunk factor of the large report. So we now have the nose wrinkle factor. So I think we're
Yeah.
developing a whole new lexicon.
New language. Yes,
Exactly, which is great. So thank you for adding nose wrinkle to that. Now you talked about a little bit you've kind of teased this a little bit in the answer to your previous question, but how do you differentiate between true thought leadership and what might be considered more routine content or commentary at TTP? What criteria do you use?
Well, I think we're getting better at it. And I think we now make sort of three clear distinctions between different types of thought leadership or content, should I say, three types of content. So there's case studies and how-tos, insight-driven articles, and then true thought leadership. But I mean, we call it routine, but actually that routine or tactical content is what keeps us visible. It helps demonstrate our technical credibility, and it's really important for our website. So, it's a really important part of the puzzle. Insight articles let us show that we understand our clients' issues and markets, and that we can offer a useful perspective. I think so. That's again really important. Truth or leadership, that is something else, and it has to be original, it has to be commercially relevant, and I think it has to be genuinely disruptive.
Okay, so there's a hierarchy really.
Yeah, and I think gone are the days, thank goodness, of spending thousands on global surveys, months writing a white paper to drive a 12 to 18-month global campaign. I think apart from anything, audiences are probably less patient, they're more content hungry, they've got a smaller attention span. So I think you do need that big cornerstone of thinking. But we web and social content that drives engagement just as much, and that is actually probably more of our day-to-day fodder. Not everything has to be thought leadership, but everything that we publish anyway does need to deliver on a purpose.
And that's interesting. It's not that you're you're necessarily kind of trying to upscale average content thought leadership. You're recognizing that everything has a different role in that kind of hierarchy of purpose,
Yeah.
and that's okay.
Yeah, and yeah, equally important, just running in a different lane.
Okay. So you've worked across different professional services environments, including law firms, and now you're in a technology and product development consultancy. How does thought leadership differ across these sectors, and what common challenges persist? I mean, does it differ much, or is it broadly similar if you're in professional service of one kind or another?
Well, I think the topics will obviously pretty differently, differ dramatically. Between sort of law and what I'm in now, which is technology, it's obviously quite significantly different. I think there's more of a commonality between maybe the professional services of accountancy and management consulting. They're probably dealing with the sort of same things, but ultimately across the sectors and client markets, the fundamentals are the same. The challenge is always to find and I think frame ideas that matter to the audiences, and build trust through clarity and credibility. That's the fundamental part of our marketing content, is can we build credibility and trust, and that needs insight and clarity at all levels.
Okay. Can you share an example of what you consider successful thought leadership TTP or any of your previous roles, and tell us a bit what made it effective?
Well, I think we thought leadership at TTP can be pretty niche, because it usually involves some kind of scientific or technical breakthrough, so it will appeal to a very technical and possibly very niche audience. That can make it harder to translate into marketing content, but if you get it right, I think it's really important. Obviously, sometimes what's academically interesting and what's commercially useful, that can take a bit of judgment and perhaps a bit of uncomfortable honesty, shall we say. But I think, to your question, one recent example I'd say of what I would consider to be genuinely disruptive thought leadership was something we published in late 2024. And I'll try and get the science right. It's based on room temperature stable mRNA therapeutics. Okay, so this is tackling one of the biggest barriers in global health, and then it's about vaccines and other treatments, so sort of things like COVID, but also sort of infectious diseases, but also moving on to things like cancer. They need ultra cold storage. It's like -80, for those kind of vaccines and treatments, and that obviously has issues with transportation and storage. It has issues with the developing countries. So our team actually explored how dry powder inhalable formulations could eliminate what they call the cold chain entirely. So that means those therapies can be stored, shipped, and even administered sort of via like an inhaler. And it just wasn't a technical breakthrough. It was a completely different way of thinking about global healthcare access. It's not clinically proven, and that would take years, but it's the thinking that counts. And we are currently sort of following through on that thinking and doing our own internal project to see how we can develop treatments for that. So it's really impressive science. But the thought leadership itself, I think it's how we framed the insight. It's, that we challenged assumptions, that we told a clear story, that we connected it to technical rigor, that we had some human impact, which obviously makes it a sweet spot. Now, we promoted it on the usual channels, social, we did video, we did the article on the web, obviously. It's too niche for me to say now, a few months later, that I've got staggering KPIs to share with you. But the thing about that piece is it is a strong showcase piece for our website for years to come. Helping to drive SEO and importantly building our credibility in what they call in vitro diagnostics, which will attract clients. So it's a really key piece of thinking, which isn't, as I say, necessarily a marketing campaign behind it. It's just credibility, and it's so important for us.
And it plays the question of trust, as you said.
Yeah.
So, which we probably could dig into more in this conversation, but we haven't necessarily prepped for it. Um, I think that kind of campaign sounds inspirational, doesn't it? To be able to work for an organization that does things like that, that maybe not immediately, but are theoretically able to change healthcare, and then presumably all those positive implications that come from
I think it's just being around people who are that clever, you
that.
know, slightly intimidating, but yeah, it is really interesting that they are thinking about new ways of things that will change lives.
But what it's not quite interesting though, you made the point it's something that proves credibility and trust over a long period of time. It's not necessarily it doesn't play and it actually relates back to possibly the next question I'm going to ask and what you've answered before around the interrelation and the hierarchy between your marketing activities and what this, given the niche nature of this and the technicalities associated with it, as you described, it's not necessarily a campaign that will be sit comfortably or well going broad and long to the wider market because most people aren't going to understand it or need to know that. So is that correct? So you're because I have this notion of that great thought leadership looks like the kind of big long idea that can be propagated through all these different channels and brought to life by different assets. This sounds like this isn't that, but that's not doesn't mean it's any less.
No, it's really niche, and as I say, the audience is niche. But I think if you're, you know, as far as search, and I think you know, including sort of like the AI searches that's obviously coming forward, it's really important for us to have that kind of technical depth. Um, we had a case study on our website that I think was redrafted in 2019, but even then it was relatively sort of an old case study. And we got a call just a few months ago from a client because they put into ChatGPT effectively the title of the case study, and that's going to be a project that could turn into millions. It's really highly technical. It's a very specific problem. It's the kind of thing you'd imagine somebody on the client side might say, type into ChatGPT, find me a company who can do this. So us having technical details and technical information that is truly transformational on our website is important. It's not the only thing. And this is something I think we'll talk about is getting my consultants to write about stuff that our competitors have written about is also important because we can't have gaps. And actually that can be a bit of a challenge getting them to participate in that.
Okay, there's lots in that. I like the notion of this almost a coaching role to encourage people who maybe people skills isn't their primary uh, area of expertise. And then the notion of legacy content as well, which some people
Yeah,
is often tempting to get rid of. Oh, we've had that for 3 years; it's not useful anymore. But clearly, in this situation, it definitely is.
yeah.
Very interesting. Okay, so this kind of does build on, we've talked about this before a little bit, but talking a little bit about the kind of, we talked about the hierarchy of different content types and how that does different jobs. And, you know, I was going to ask you, there seems to be a tension between marketing's need for content that performs well for search engines, and that tends to imply a kind of mass market search engine appeal, whereas you just mentioned a kind of niche search engine context versus the technical team's desire to write highly specialized content for peers. How do you navigate that balance? I mean, I guess it's partly it's a question of what content gets produced by whom. Is that correct?
Well, we do need the consultants to produce all the content. It's just, I suppose, how closely they align themselves to it. I think, you know, ultimately, it's definitely a common tension. Um, their academic training as scientists, you know, their PhDs often mean they've only actually ever considered publishing something that will get them sort of peer recognition. So they can struggle with writing on a topic, as I mentioned, if one of our competitors has covered it, they can struggle. They don't want to write something somebody else has written on. That's not pushing the boundaries. That's not going into a new area. That's kind of old hat. But of course, in marketing, we don't want those sort of SEO blind spots. So for us, actually looking at a content grid and saying we need to have something that talks about that because, you know, Google is going to look at our whole site and it's going to rank us according to what content we have. And if it looks like we don't talk about something, you know, that will hurt us. So routine commentary is actually vital for our positioning and our general brand awareness. And we cannot create even that without the experts. We need them to have an opinion, to have a thought. We're not technical writers. We are not the experts. Hopefully we can help them translate it into something that's working for different audiences. So, we'll have technical audiences. We'll also have C-suite audiences. We'll have, possibly even marketing audiences. So, there is a variety there. So I think one of the challenges we have is actually getting our consultants to understand and importantly value all the types of content that we need. So some pieces might be insight driven and quite practical, which are great for SEO, social engagement, etc. And others are more transformational, going deeper, taking longer, and perhaps hopefully becoming true thought leadership. But not everything has to be disruptive, and not everything has to be Google optimized. It really is about deciding what those things are. And I think that's a really important thing for us to help them understand. And it's about us being truthful. Which type of content do we need? And then not over claiming, because technical experts hate that. They can see through it. So I think it also, I think, shows respect for their work and their insights. If you're saying, look, this piece is just for this, but it means it will help us in this way. So if we always deliver for them a piece at the end of the day, which has that authenticity, which has that clarity, and hopefully that usefulness, depending on what the use is, then they can trust us on the marketing purpose.
And thank you for that. That's really helpful. And then I assume that all of the thought leadership content has to come from these experts, these technical people in the business. Does that also mean that any of the more kind of demand generation SEO content has to come from them also, or is there an aspect? Is marketing able to create any of its own content, or is it so specialist and so technical that you're relying on the specialists to do everything?
I think it has to come from the experts. I think in all of the professional consultancies, professional services firms I've worked with, I think it has to come from the expert. We might help shape the story, but we might help shape the idea. We might say, this is something that could be interesting. What do you think? And then chew the fat with them to see if there's something there that's worth building on. But I think it has to be from the people who the clients are buying. It's not a marketing voice. In professional services, it is the experts. That's what we're selling. We're selling their expertise.
Okay.
So I think the important thing is on the more routine stuff, if you can get the consultants comfortable with it, they will let go of it once they've shaped the general idea. They'll let go of the middle bit. So they'll help come up with the idea, and they'll probably sign off the final edit, but they'll ease off a bit on really being all over the actual every word. They won't be so precious about it. And the benefit of that for me is we can actually then use ghostwriters. So I often say to them, look, just have a phone call with a journalist, talk about the conversation. The journalist will then structure an article for you, which you will then have review of. And that can build something that's a bit lighter. It's a bit more, it has that journalistic feel to it. It's also can be a lot quicker, because one of the things I think that we all suffer from is consultants in any professional services get involved with something and they will put it down as soon as the client calls. And sometimes it's a bit difficult to get them to pick it back up again. So I think that the use of ghostwriters just to help shape the story based on strong, deep interviews with the consultants is a really helpful thing. So I think that's really important.
So it's interesting because there's two dimensions of trust there. There's the trust that you're trying to engender within your customers, or your prospective customers. There's also the trust internally. The subject matter experts, the experts need to trust what you're doing as a marketing function to represent their views effectively.
Yeah, and we actually have a scientific editor on our team. And he has his own PhD. So, we've got 2 PhDs in our marketing team, actually, believe it or not. So Adam has a PhD, and he's really good at helping to shape the more technical content. So what I tend to do is the routine stuff we'll do more lighthearted. We might use journalists and ghostwriters, as I say. And then when it's a bit deeper and it needs that scientific rigor, then we'll use our scientific editor to help shape that. And he has a portfolio of other scientific sort of authors who can help shape the ideas. And that's really, really useful. But he's working on, he helped with the mRNA piece, for example. That's something that he helped shape and turn into something that's really effective.
Okay. When we spoke previously, you mentioned you were evolving thought leadership. Tell us a bit about that. Tell us about the journey you're trying to take it on. Obviously, there is always a transformation and a journey, but tell us a bit about what that looks like at TTP.
Oh, I think it's really about it's defining what thought leadership is and thinking about those tiers, as we've spoken about, those lanes, if you like. So I think it's I think thought leadership, I've often thought, is there a different term? Can we use a different term than thought leadership? Because it is so hackneyed and it has been overused so much. But I think what's happened is much more about that in the past few years, sort of alternative content types have become more clearly defined, and that's allowed sort of thought leadership to stand apart again. So it's that's quite a useful transformation, if you like. I think then obviously other formats have come in, podcasts, for example, and other video and that kind of those kind of, even dare I say it, carousels on LinkedIn, those sorts of things are also transforming at least ways in and ways to sort of compartmentalize and do the sort of the thought leadership. But as I say, mostly I think it's about us in our team. We're better now at defining different types of content, and I think that's the transformation.
That's really interesting. One of the things we often talk about in B2B, we talk about humanization. We often talk about consumerization. And then one of the trends you can see certainly in the entries to the B2B Marketing Awards last year is there was a lot of content was coming out. It would look borderline like what you might download off a streamer. But I guess that's probably not something that's going to trouble your output, given the highly academic nature of it. Can you see any consumerization trends coming into your content, or least of all your thought leadership?
Absolutely. I mean, I've sort of been talking to them about doing things around sort of, we work with a lot of startups. So, they're well-funded startups, but so they're not kind of one-man sort of bands. They've got a significant idea. They've got some research, some funding, etc. But actually, they are still startups. And so I've said we've worked with hundreds of startups. So what's really useful when startups come to us, now they come to us because there's no way they will meet their funding milestones if they were to hire a team, build a lab, or even rent a lab. It's just too much. So that by coming to us, they come to ready-made labs, they come to ready-built teams, and the interactivity of our teams and the cross-discipline nature of our teams is really good, because they might be biologists, whereas we're physicists and engineers as well as biologists. So they're getting that whole mix. But also what they're getting is actually how to run the project successfully. So one of the things I've been talking about is actually developing more light-hearted content, but answering that question around, what makes a successful startup, what helps startups succeed or fail, and actually turning their insights into more business-focused insights rather than just science. And that's something quite new for TTP. And I think sort of them understanding that they actually have things, sort of how to avoid failure as a startup. We did a sort of classic top 10, and that was quite light-hearted. It went on social media, it's on the website, it's quite good for SEO, but it's a completely different. Whereas before they would have only focused on the science, and
So,
actually we advise clients in other ways.
so you are mirroring this trend, not even in a minor way, in a reasonably significant way. We're seeing that even across a company that's as technical as you are. That's pretty fascinating.
Well, the thing I keep saying to people is, why do people come to our website? They'll come to our website when they're first shopping, when they're looking around, and then they'll come to our website if they've seen something on LinkedIn, or they've done a search on a particular specific topic, and they'll come for that. But then, what we want them to do is to kind of come back, and we want them to see us as something that actually is a resource for them, that actually helps them build their own credibility. And I've sort of said to people, if you help clients, if you give them something that enables them to go internally to get budget for something, if you give them the argument that will help them build their case for their internal budget, if they get that budget, then hopefully they're going to come back to you as the trusted resource for that. So I think those sort of business tools are really important, and they come from a kind of wider thought. It's not thought leadership because you're not disrupting stuff, you're not changing the world, you're offering useful business tools. And I think that's something I'm trying to get TTP to do. It's difficult because they're terrified of sort of giving away the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah.
And I'm saying you kind of want to get it to the point where you're giving people enough that they have to come back to you for more.
Yeah.
But we've got loads of really good insights about how to run projects, about how to do business, about how to work, avoid being in silos in a big international multinational company, all of that stuff. And I keep referring back to HubSpot. You know, marketers go back to HubSpot's website all the time for the tools they've got, you know.
I completely agree. I always refer to the Jay Bauer thing from 10 years ago, stop selling, start helping, and you've got to help people to a certain extent. It's that balance between, as you say, giving away your crown jewels at the same time. If you're not helping somebody, then why are they going to come to you? So
You've got to find that balance.
Yeah, fascinating challenge. So let's just pivot back more towards pure thought leadership for a moment then. One of the conversations often happens around, and some things I'm learning around thought leadership is the role of research within that. Does thought leadership have to always contain research, or are there other approaches, other kind of ways of backing up thought leadership equally valid?
I think if it's genuine and pioneering research, as I said before, gone are the days of just sort of interviewing 400 to 1,000 C-suites, seeing what they say, and then basing a white paper on it. So I think, yes, if it's genuine, it's a great foundation. But I think the days of generating research just from a marketing campaign feels, for me, increasingly out of step. It's basically the insight that counts, and data helps, but enough to prove the original thinking. It might just be observed patterns. It might be just a smart synthesis of looking at other things that are out there. But it's have you made a thought connection? Have you drawn a conclusion that is hopefully genuinely interesting and new? And if research helps build that as a credible concept, then great. But as I say, I spent years where the sort of almost the research came first.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, isn't it? There's a distinction between research and data, is kind of, I felt like what you were saying there. And possibly some of the data might be downstream of what the actual opinion piece is, but it's still kind of bedded in, because I imagine that your team aren't going to be coming up with something on a whim. They've something they've thought of at the bus stop. They're going to be, it's going to be
Well,
pretty.
there are those eureka shower moments, I think, but yeah.
Okay. So we're kind of drawing to the end of our questions now. I mean, we talked about how thought leadership's evolving, and I think you talked about some consumerization trends. It is, even in your world, is moving beyond white papers and articles. Are there any mentioned podcasts? Anything that you've seen that works particularly well, or things that you're eager to try?
I think we're probably using the gamut of channels. I think it is podcasts, it is the live events, it is turning those live events into an article if you can get that out of it. I think it is the stand thing. So I don't think it's really about format. I think we're still shaping role, and thinking about this in between our conversations and today. I was thinking back to, I was talking to this is years ago, and I was talking to, I think he was the head of client insight, or it was a big role. It was really about developing insights for clients at one of the big four. And he told me that he only does black ops thought leadership, of the term black ops thought leadership, and he refused to participate in marketing. So this is somebody who is genuinely generating new insights for clients, and he refused to participate in marketing. And this is over a decade ago. So he explained to me that his role was to develop genuine insights that he would give to a handful of clients, because that insight was commercially valuable. So why on earth would he publish it? And I think, it's obviously thought leadership as extremely focused BD. And I think, obviously it stayed with me. I sort of pondered it in the interim years. I pondered it because it's really about what he saw in the value was the secrecy, the secrecy of it, the fact that you were getting into the VIP club to see it was, and it's because he was a fee earner. He was genuinely doing it for clients. So he was doing it for clients. It was for free. It wasn't a project, but he was using it as a BD opener. Now, sort of as a B2B marketeer, I need to focus on building broad market awareness. I need to build, I'm trying to brand build. So, my content may come from BD or it may support BD. And I think that's a really important challenge for us to think about. How do we support and work with BD? But whatever I create, I definitely want to promote it. I want it to be, as on many channels as possible. So, does that mean I'm taking away some of its commercial value? And I don't know. I've never really got my head around that.
I think it's a fascinating challenge. It does add one more to the lexicon. We have Black Ops thought leadership, which is a new term.
Yeah, I've always loved it. I've always thought, when can I do Black Ops thought leadership?
I think it's great. I can see why people would like it as well, because you say it's secret, scarcity value, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, but I think it's exciting how we're exploring the parameters of what it could do and how you can frame it in different ways. So that's really interesting. I hadn't heard of that before. So final question from me. This has been a really fascinating conversation, Hayley. Thank you. What advice would you offer to marketers who are struggling to engage highly technical or specialized experts in creating accessible, or perhaps not accessible, but commercially relevant thought leadership content?
I think it's what we've talked about. It's understanding what you're asking of people and understanding which lane you need to be in. And it may be something you're developing sort of may cross over, maybe more than one lane. You might be able to turn something that is a white paper into a carousel for LinkedIn. But ultimately, making people understand and value what you're trying to do as a marketeer is multi-lane, and helping them to create something that is valuable to share with clients, regardless of those different types. I think that's really important. So just take the time to don't misrepresent, don't overclaim, work out what your content grid looks like and populate it with your experts' help, making sure they understand what you're asking of them, and that I think importantly that they value what you're creating for them.
It sounds like build trust, build partnership to me.
Yeah, definitely, totally.
Okay. Hayley, it's been a wonderful conversation. Really enjoyed hearing your experiences, both in currently and from before. So thanks so much for being my guest today.
Thank you very much. It's been really good fun. Thank you. I've enjoyed it. So yes, thanks so much for a great conversation and a good topic.
Great. Thank you very much. Well, if you've listened to this and enjoyed it, please don't hesitate to subscribe. There's lots of great content like this from other thought leaders and marketing practitioners like Hayley. I've been Joel Harrison. This is the B2B Trust and Influence podcast. Thanks very much for listening.